and then we might have some others that join us. But thank you very much for joining me today. We're focusing today's masterclass on trust me, why you need to be deliberate about trusting your team, and as if we've ever trusted someone when they say trust me. Like it's the worst thing, isn't it? Like, trust me, it'll be a great session. Terrible thing to say. Hopefully, it will be a great session anyway. Um, Jay, what I might do is just put you on co-host if that's okay. So you could just welcome people in as they come in. We've got a 60-minute masterclass today. I'll shortly share screen. And so the aim for today, in fact, I'll do that now, is to be looking at this concept of trust, but particularly trust in deliberate leadership and why we need it. Really, I mean, look, trust is a great thing. We need it all the time and for everything, but particularly in our teams. And as we're building relationships with others. And I've literally just come off a coaching call with someone, and it probably is because I've got trust on my brain because I'm covering it with all of you today. But this person was talking to me about you know, impromptu thinking, storytelling. They're quite an introverted person. And we were really trying to explore some strategies and techniques for this person. And at the end of the day, it does boil down to trust. Like we're doing all these things, we connect in with people through storytelling. The power of storytelling and connection. The reason we're doing it is effectively because of trust. It's an outcome. It's not the only reason, but it's often a key reason in terms of why we're doing those things. So it comes up in absolutely everything. Before we commence formally today, I just want to acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri country, and I want to pay my respects to Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, past, present, and elders in terms of their leaders in their community. And I pay my respects to your lands wherever you're coming in from today across this great country. And I know that we've got, I think most, well, not most, I know all states, at least along the eastern seaboard, plus Adelaide are being represented. So I pay my respects to your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders too. So trust me, here we are. Welcome to those of you that I've not seen or met before. My name is Rita Chincotta. I run an organisation called The Deliberate Leader, and every month we hang out with a bunch of people, different numbers of people, and we run these masterclasses. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to do that. Today, it's about trust me. So what are we covering in the next 60 minutes or so? I wanted to give you a little bit of I think we probably all understand what trust is because it's often felt, but really understanding it in that leadership context, why we need it, how we can recover when trust does erode, because it does for different reasons, recognizing what weakens it in a team. And so there'll be some discussion there around psychological safety and particularly looking at Amy Edmondson's work. And then what are some everyday things that we can do? So I just wanted to give you some really practical tips and suggestions, and then a little bit of a formula at the end around, how we can create some trust repair if we feel that trust has been broken. We're a small group today, so please, by all means, feel free to raise your hands and let me know that you've got a question or something that you want to contribute. I think that makes for a much richer discussion anyway. Is everyone okay with that? Beautiful. All right. So before we go in, I was working with a bunch of CEOs, and we were actually doing a session on leading like a coach. And they, one of them in particular, so it was a building and construction company, and he shared a story which really, I'll get those emojis off the screen. I don't know what they're doing there. But he shared a story which was pretty powerful around. So we were talking about trust and the reason that we need trust, particularly in that coaching relationship, and extending that to leadership. But he told a story to the whole group, and it was a time when, he reflected. It was one of those times where you go, oh, gee, I would have done that differently, right? I'm sure we've all got moments and times that we can think of where we think I would have done that differently. But this sales director had received some feedback from a client in relation to his regional sales manager. And the feedback was not great. It was quite scathing, actually, of the regional sales manager. The regional sales manager had raised issues with their sales director about this client. So hopefully you've got this image of a triangle, right, coming to your mind, where you've got sales director and then you've got regional sales manager, which was their direct report plus the client. And the sales director is getting conflicting information from both. But the regional sales manager is his direct report. he's a member of his team, and obviously the client is the client. The client had an issue because an order that they tried to put through, so building and construction, materials, chemicals, etc., so orders of materials that the client needed, uh, the order did not go through in time, which meant that it held up a project that the client had to do, right? The client blamed that on the regional sales manager and said, well, it was because of such and such that our order was mucked up. The sales director, upon hearing this, didn't really verify that information, went and basically had a go at the regional sales manager. And by that stage, is a bit annoyed at having heard from the client a few times, but didn't verify really any of the detail. Well, not to the extent that they should have upon reflection. And they had a crack at the regional sales manager. And the regional sales manager then was able to establish that no, 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 hold on a minute. The reason this sale didn't go through was because blah, blah, blah. It wasn't the fault at all of the regional sales manager. So the sales director then had that very awkward moment of having to go and rectify and apologize. But it was a bit beyond that. The trust had been broken, right? So the regional sales manager by that point is like, well, can I even work with you? If I can't trust that you're going to have my back and that you're just going to believe the client story before mine, can I even work with you? Right. So the saving grace in all of that. So to cut a long story short, otherwise I could talk about this example for the whole hour, which is interesting for me, but may not be so interesting for you. The At the end of the day, they were able to repair the relationship. The regional sales manager is still employed. They still have the client on board. The sales director did have to go in and apologize and certainly try and repair that relationship. But it has stood out for that sales director as an all-time story and one for the ages about how trust can be broken and quite badly with someone that you've known for a very, very, very long time. So there was a bit of there was discomfort in having to apologize because it's not that the sales director didn't want to apologize. They knew they had to, but the biggest concern they had now was, oh my gosh, what have I done to trust in this relationship? And this regional sales manager is one of my best. So now what do I do? Right? So the apology wasn't the problem, but when we damage trust and it really then creates fundamental cracks in the relationship, it's pretty hard to come back from. Does anyone agree with that, or do you think that most situations are repairable and you can come back from them? What do people think? Feel free to unmute.
I feel like it could depend on the circumstances, really, and then how the approach is done. Because I know everyone, makes a mistake, and being able to, have a second chance kind of is important. But yeah, that having your back is something that when that doesn't happen, then I think it is probably quite hard to come back from.
Yeah.
I
And I
think I would
think,
agree
yeah,
that,
go ahead,
um,
Stephanie.
yeah, sorry, I agree. It's definitely depends on the circumstances and maybe how big a trust, but also I think about micro breaks of trust as well. So it might not be one big thing. It could be tiny little things adding up and eventually you just get to the point where that trust has been broken because it's been micro breaks happening quite a lot. So yeah, definitely I agree. It depends on the circumstance and what's happened. Is it one big thing? Is it many tiny little things? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone else want to give their view?
Uh, for me, I think it also depends on whether that trust being broken is directed at you. Sometimes, people can break other people's trust within you, to try and gain yours, which is, yeah, it's a red flag for me not to trust that person, because if they're sharing information about somebody else or speaking negatively about somebody else, then, essentially they could be saying the same thing about me,
Yeah.
at a different time to somebody else.
Yeah. So it's kind of information that puts us on guard, like these micro breaks, Stephanie. I love the notion of that because they are little fractures that just put us on guard. It's almost like a cautionary warning. Sometimes it's the big stuff. Often the big stuff though If the relationship is solid enough, it won't be enough to break it. Usually there are little telltale signs along the way that then create that moment where the person goes, well, this is now irreparable. We can't come back from this. Okay. So in the spirit of this sales director, my slides will move eventually. I'm curious from your perspectives, what does high trust in a team look like? And also, what does low trust in a team look like? And I'm very happy for you to just pop your comments in the chat. So what does it look like in a team when we have high trust? But then what does it look like when it's low? Scanning through the chat. Yeah, nice. Oh, nice little 2x2 there, Louise. I like it. You can see there, like, as where I'm scanning through the chat, but it feels good, right? It feels good to work with it in a team with trust. And I mean, what do we mean by good? Define good, reader. As you can see there, open and friendly, it's collaborate. There's that willingness. We're connecting into purpose. We understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. We can speak openly, which we're going to talk a bunch about in psychological safety. Yeah, helpful and collaborative. But when it's not good, so we get that sense, right? And it's something very much it's felt. It's at this energetic level. When it's not good, though, I don't think we've had anything other than high caution from Louise. But what does it look like when it's not good? When there's low trust in a team? Absolutely siloed working. Yeah. Oh, look at those come through thick and fast. A little thicker and faster, actually, than that high trust in the comments. Yeah, politics too, right, Dave? Absolutely. That siloed working, the number of leadership teams that I work with where we just try and unravel those silos and we bring in what I call then the golden threads. How do we make sure that we're all connected and we actually know what's the golden thread that weaves us all together? Yeah, absolutely hesitant, not willing to take risks or speak. And that's that guarded and disengagement. We kind of forget why we're there. We go into very much individually, this is what I'm going to do. These are my KPIs and what I'm working on. Good. I think we've all got a sense of what it is. This is my all-time favorite quote on trust. You might have seen this before if you've done some work with me. It's a Dutch proverb, trust arrives on foot, leaves on horseback. What does that mean? You don't have to be Dutch, by the way. I'm not Dutch. And I have had people that are Dutch that go, no, Rita, no such proverb doesn't exist. But I am told that it does. What does it mean?
It's built very slowly and over time, but it can leave in an instant.
That's right. Do we agree with that? These are those micro breaks that Stephanie mentioned before. It takes a long time to build trust. But the interesting thing about trust is that if you think about your personal and your professional relationships, I find, and I'm told by others, and this is my experience too, that it's hard to pinpoint the time when we trusted somebody. Would you agree with that? It's hard to go, yep, it was that month and that day where I realized that I trusted you. But I bet you can pinpoint the exact moment and day when you realized you didn't trust them. Is that right for people? And it's in that, it's often, it kind of builds over time and it matches this, I think, this proverb beautifully, that because it builds over time, we don't really notice it's there, right? We're just building that trust over time. It's through these micro actions, these trust credits, that we keep depositing into our trust account together. And then, something happens and we're hurt by it. We can really feel when there's no trust there. And so off the back of this quote, and even just to Stephanie's comments, we've got to work on building it all the time. And it's these trust credits we've got to continue to deposit in our relationships. Now, particularly when it comes to, and everything you'll hear today, it is centered around leadership and teams, but there's application on a personal level too. So, and you might want to be thinking about that as you go through the masterclass also. Patrick Lencioni wrote a great book many years ago now called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Has anybody read it? Or do you have a copy of it? If you don't have it, I would recommend this one. Even if you kind of get yourself a summary on Goodreads or Chat will do a good summary of it for you. But it is a good book to get, I think, if you had to kind of pick your top 10 in leadership books, top 10 of all time, this is definitely my top 10. Patrick Lencioni talks about these 5 dysfunctions of a team. And the book is beautifully written. It's almost like a fable, a story of a CEO who lands in a new organization and she inherits a dysfunctional team, but also a dysfunctional organization. And she's got to work through what reveal as these 5 dysfunctions before she can get to the team performing to a high performing level and where she wants them to be. And the first dysfunction that is identified is this absence of trust. And it's the first one. It's the foundational layer, if you like, of this pyramid. And without trust, Patrick Lencioni says, well, don't bother focusing on the other stuff if you do not have trust. So we can't move into, productive conflict, as he calls it, or, really being able to have good conversations where we debate and critique something, and we're actually critiquing the thing, not the person. We can't do that if we don't have trust. We can't be committed together as a group. And this is, when you people said, siloed working, disengaged, that guarded. If we don't have trust, we can't move into good debate, and therefore we're not going to be committed. So what this looks like in a team is that we walk out of the team meeting or the leadership meeting, and maybe we are leading a team. So we might be a team of leaders, but then we go back to our teams and we're leading a team and we say things like, no, we're not doing that. We've agreed to this, but we're not doing it. It's a shitty idea. We're not going to do it. So even though in the actual leadership team meeting, we've all sat there politely and nodded our head. Yep, we're all in agreement. This is what we're doing. Yep, this is absolutely what we're doing. But we're not committed. Right? And we're not committed because perhaps there was a fear of really being able to debate this issue, of really putting forward our perspective. Maybe there was a lack of psychological safety. Maybe, we at the end of the day, there was not enough trust. And so for whatever reason, there's not enough trust. We're not comfortable enough to really put that view forward. If we're not committed, get my cursor back. If we're not committed, what ends up happening is that we avoid accountability. And this is particularly dangerous in organizations because when something happens, and invariably it does, a project does not run on time or on budget, or we miss a deadline, or we miss a client order, like you heard in my story earlier on. If we don't have that trust and therefore we don't have the, good productive conflict commitment, we go, well, that's not our fault. That's finance's fault. That's marketing's fault. That's HR's fault. That's IT's fault. That's the sales team. That's the whatever, right? And then we kind of do this. We're pointing fingers. Nobody's prepared to take on the accountability for whatever has happened. And then finally, it all leads to this inattention to results, which lead, poor results, KPIs being missed, targets not being met. If there is dysfunction, where do you think you see it first? So notwithstanding everything I've already told you, but where do you reckon you see it first?
In the results.
Spot on, Sean. And what does that mean in your organizations? Is it a scorecard, dashboard? What does it look like?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Just possibly like workload in general. Yeah.
So workload, then maybe we get a bit of burnout happening. We get a few work cover claims, maybe more of them coming through than what we would normally have. We get disengagement, poor engagement results. Yeah. So interestingly, the inattention to results is a little bit like our car dashboard or whatever dashboard you want to think of, right? But it's the bit that tells us that there's a problem. It's a warning light. But by the time we see and we feel the warning light, I don't want to be pessimistic about it because I'm generally not pessimistic, but it's too late. By the time your warning light tells you you don't have enough fuel, you're stuffed. Like you might be very, very far away from a petrol station or from an EV charger, whatever way you get your car going, right? It's too late. So these 5 dysfunctions of a team, and particularly where I want to focus on, obviously, today's trust, it's too late once we get to dashboard. And what we want to try and do is avoid that if we can. It's not always possible to do it. But what Lencioni's work tells us is that if we are focusing on all of these dysfunctions, but particularly paying attention to trust first, then that's going to have a positive effect on all of these other dysfunctions. And ultimately, it means we create a high-performing team. Everyone want one of those? I do. I've already got one of those. But we always want more of those, right? So we want high-performing teams. And so this model helps us to get there. Any comments, Dave? I am so glad that you love it. It is a great read. It's a super easy read. So I'm glad you love it. Any other comments on this before we move? All good? All right. So we'll keep Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions in mind, particularly with his focus on absence of trust. And where I want to go to now is this thing called a trust equation. You might have seen this if you're in last month's masterclass or the one before. I think we did touch on this, but because we're talking about trust today, I can't not bring this in. Can I just have a show of hands if you've seen this before? Renee, beautiful. Steph too, excellent. This is from David Meister and a couple of his colleagues, Charles Green and Robert Guilford, and they wrote a book about it's over 20 years ago now. I think it was published in 21, called The Trusted Advisor. And it was actually written as a book for accountants and lawyers and those that work in professional services. It was written for them as a bit of a guide, as it suggests, to help them build trust with their clients. Because you can imagine that when you're dealing with, people's financial information, when you're giving them legal advice, and in any capacity as a consultant in professional services, trust is your glue, right? It's your thing that makes sure that they listen to you. Do you think? Does everyone agree with that? Like imagine working with someone who is a trusted advisor for you and they've got great credibility because they've got the expertise and they've got the professional qualifications that tell you they are an expert in that area. But then they don't deliver. Doctors are notorious for this, like specialists in particular. You'll turn up to the special, like I had a specialist appointment for one of my children a couple of weeks ago, and we kept on getting, luckily it was virtual. I would have been pretty annoyed if I was in person. I kept on getting text messages from the practice manager going, oh, they're 20 minutes late. Oh, sorry, another 20 minutes late. Oh, sorry, now this has happened. I was like, calm off it. I know you're good, but seriously. And then what's a practice manager? What are you doing around running that? So, it's actually running. I was pretty annoyed. And so whilst my trust in the expertise did not waver because they are a great specialist, my trust in their overall capability was like, well, if you can't even kind of organize your practice, then what confidence does that give me that you can run other parts of your business to an extent where I can trust? So when we're looking for trust, even though, we might be working with whoever we're working with, credibility is not the only thing that we're looking at. What this equation tells us is that we're looking for 3 aspects, and these 3 aspects need to be present in equal measure in order for us to trust the person. Credibility. So do they have the right level of expertise? If there's someone in our team, and let's go with that as an example to work through this, do they have the right level of capability to do this thing that I need them to do? And if they don't, do I have trust that they can build that capability? That's important because then we're not always going to have that level of capability from the get-go. The second is reliability. So are they good for their word? If they commit to something, do they keep that commitment or do they break it? That's a really important one. That's like my experience at the doctor's at the specialist surgery a couple of weeks ago. So is everyone good on reliability and credibility so far? Okay. The third aspect is intimacy. And what this means in the context of this trust equation is that in order for us to build trust, we've got to have frequent connection and good quality connection with people in our teams or colleagues. If you don't have direct reports, you might want to be thinking about some colleagues and stakeholders. But if we are to build trust, we've got to have that frequency of connection and that quality connection. So this goes to your one-on-ones, you're having them regularly, you're talking regularly, connecting regularly. And when you are, what's the quality of that chat? Are you spending time kind of just going to task, or are you catching up with each other and just finding out a little bit about what's going on for the person? And you want to make sure you're doing both. Because what that does is it builds that social capital. And it very basically says to the person, I care for you, I value you. I don't want to just know what you're doing in terms of a work context, but I also want to know that you're okay, that you're traveling okay, that your family's okay, whatever it might be that comes up in that conversation. So that intimacy is super important, but don't hopefully not put off by that word. Some people go, oh, in a work context, and it's not obviously that. It's frequency and quality of connection. And then we have self-orientation. And this equation, what it tells us is that basically if we are only building trust with somebody because we need something from them, so maybe we need, I don't know, resourcing, so time, budget, money to get something done, or maybe maybe they're a big wig in whatever industry we're in and we want to build that relationship because we need their influence, then we don't have trust. That's just influencing, maybe manipulation, I don't know, whatever you might want to call it, but it's not trust. Does that make sense for people? So I like to bring this in because when we're thinking about trust, I think we all instinctively know what it means because trust is felt. Remember before, it's very hard to pinpoint that moment in a relationship where we go, oh yeah, I realized I trusted them then. Really easy to pinpoint when we didn't. It's felt. And because it's felt and it becomes a bit opaque and ambiguous, it's hard sometimes to know, well, what are the elements of trust? And this is why I like to bring this in. I think this is pretty simple and just really good reminders that we can use either if we're leaders or not, even in teams, around how we can build trust and what it takes to feel that trust. Does anyone want to add anything to that or have any views on this trust equation? Feel free to pop them in the chat if you want to.
Sorry, Rita, could you explain the self-orientation piece again?
Yeah, sure. So self-orientation basically means that if we are only trying to build trust and be trustworthy to satisfy ourselves, so because we need the person for, we need them as a stakeholder, we need them on board. If we're only doing it for that perspective, then it's not trust. That's influencing, which has a little bit of trust in it, maybe even manipulation. So trust it's got two sides to it. It's got to satisfy both parties in order for it to be there. It flows in between. It can't just be one way. It's very, and I mean, it's hard for me to think, but maybe someone has an example, a relationship where you trust the person, but you know that they don't trust you, or vice versa, where you trust them or they trust you, but you don't trust them. It's got a duality to it. Does that make sense for people? Shan, is that a little clearer?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Were you thinking something else?
Oh, no, I was expecting it to be the self-orientation of the person that you were trusting, not yourself. But that's all right. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I'm glad you asked that question though, because hopefully it's reinforced this. There is this duality to trust. It's really hard to trust someone when you know they don't trust you and vice versa. It doesn't mean you're going to trust each other to equal levels all the time because, I don't know, maybe one of your kids told you that they'd put out the washing and they didn't, that's going to erode a bit of trust. Like trust like debits instead of credits, or maybe someone, made some other commitment to you and they haven't been able to keep it. So your trust levels in each other are not always going to be the same, but as long as, there's this duality to it. As long as you're not just building or trying to build trust with them to get something out of them, which kids are really good at too, given the number of Robux requests that I got over the weekend. And if you're a parent, you'll know what that is for kids that might play Roblox. But anyway, different story. All right. What I'd love you to do now, just on this trust equation, could you please, we don't need to share this with each other, but could you give yourself a little score out of 5 for credibility, reliability, and intimacy with a particular relationship that you might be thinking about? So your trust in, I don't know, a direct report or a colleague. So think about the person first. And if you were to think about, how would I rate myself from a credibility, reliability, and intimacy perspective in relation to building trust with this person? And then once you've done that, I'd love you to just jot down for the one where you've scored the lowest out of 5, could you think about a little action that you could take and one that you would actually be prepared to take to help you build either credibility, reliability, or intimacy with this person? What's one action you could take? I'll give you some examples. Hopefully this is not too distracting as you're thinking, but for credibility, it might be, that you're going to speak up a little bit more in conversation so they know your background. They've got a better understanding of your expertise and your knowledge. For reliability, it could be, well, yeah, I have missed a couple of deadlines, so I'm going to make sure that I better plan my time. For intimacy, it could be, I'm going to stop shortchanging our one-on-one time and make sure that we're actually using the full time, as an example. So just something that you could do, an easy action. And out of interest, in the chat, could you just please write down which one you're focused on for your action, credibility, reliability, or intimacy, if you're happy to share. You don't need to tell us what you're doing, just which one you're going to focus on. We've got intimacy and reliability. Everyone's very credible. Intimacy is the one out of interest, if it is of interest to you, that comes up most frequently for people. And it's often because we, I get comments from people like, we're not prioritizing connection time because we're catching up a lot. And our team, and I'm looking at Jay, our team runs a risk of this because we're a virtual team. Like Jay and I are in different states and we have support overseas. So for our team, a lot of our catch up is on WhatsApp. But if we only ever do WhatsApp and we don't do any kind of face-to-face, even virtual connection, then we run the risk of impacting intimacy. So that's one that comes up most frequently. Excellent. Looks like it's the same for this group here. All right, let's keep moving. Where I want to go to now is a little bit on psychological safety. Can you give me a show of hands? Do you feel like, if you feel you know psychological safety really well, just put your hand up. For those of you that are on screen. Yeah, good, Renee, thank you. I'm not going to preach on too much about this, but I just do want to give you a few things because it goes hand in hand with trust. Yeah. So psychological safety became a thing, I think. Academics, please feel free, if you've got a background in this, to disagree with me. This is anecdotal. I reckon it became a thing after this particular case study that Google ran. So this was back in I think the actual case study was done in 2012. The write-up in New York Times came sometime later, so 4 years later. But around, so what's that now, 12, 13 years ago, Google Google actually went ahead to do this case study called Project Aristotle because it wanted to reveal what were the success factors for a great high-performing team. And off the back of that work they did, and they interviewed many, many teams. It was 1,800 people, and I can't even remember the number of teams across Google, but it was a huge, huge amount, as you could imagine. What they uncovered through that, and then combining that finding with the literature that was starting to emerge on psychological safety, they found that the most critical factor for team effectiveness was psychological safety. So this notion that people could present at work as themselves, not have any fear of, retribution for their approaches, their beliefs, and contribution. I'm not so much talking about political, social beliefs. It's like, oh, well, if we're going to change the color of this cover from this rose kind of pink to green, and I feel really against that, do I feel comfortable enough to speak up, right, in our team? Or am I going to keep that to myself? If I'm keeping that to myself because I worry about, being criticized or offended or judged, then that there's low psychological safety. There's also not much productive conflict happening, right? So there's that fear of conflict if we're drawing back from Patrick Lencioni's framework that we just looked at. In short, from this study, and then there was a whole bunch of other study, and academics started to do some work on this concept of psychological safety. And we need trust to have high levels of psychological safety. We also need to know that we can depend on our team. We've got structure and clarity, so role clarity, turning up and doing what we understand that we need to be doing. We're deriving meaning, so we've got clear purpose, why we're doing whatever it is that we're doing, and there is impact to what we're doing. So this was a body of work really that that started an industry on psychological safety. This woman here, Professor Amy Edmondson, is probably, it's a grand statement, but I think she's the key leader globally around psychological safety. And she's written a bunch of books. She's excellent. If you want to follow her on TED, on LinkedIn, definitely, but she's got some really, really great TED Talks. And she speaks, this is her research area, right? So it's all about psychological safety and trust in particular. But she really puts forward very, very clear reasons and clear evidence around when we're focused on psychological safety and trust, how this results in much better commercial outcomes in organizations. And I like raising that because, sometimes and I don't know if anyone has this sentiment or not, but sometimes, particularly when I'm working with groups of CEOs, they can often think, oh, well, this is all the nice stuff. Like, we'll get to it when we get to it, but we kind of got to drive commercial outcomes. And Amy's work says, well, you can't get to the commercial outcomes. You will have friction in trying to achieve the commercial outcomes that you want unless you really think about trust, psychological safety, all those things that sometimes are considered soft. There's nothing soft about it. We know that when we're focused on these things, we have much, much better business outcomes. So Amy's one to really look at if you are interested in this kind of work. This is one of her books, or this comes from one of her books, The Fearless Organization. I've adapted it slightly. But if we are really to be focused on psychological safety and trust at work, as leaders, but also just as good kind of corporate citizens and people that play a role in teams, there's 4 kind of roles that Amy talks about. And she says the first one is that we've got to model vulnerability. And so when when someone asks us how we are or how your weekend was, you don't need to be, the team oversharer, but it is always nice to kind of, a little bit of flavor around what you are. The person I was talking to someone today who's a trail runner, and I didn't know this about them. It was that third time actually that I've had a conversation with them. And it was great because I've learned a lot about, a lot more about this person, and we could bring that experience of trail running into his coaching program, right? So when we're modeling vulnerability, we're just giving a little bit more of ourselves. It helps to build trust because people have a greater understanding of who we are, where we come from, what lights us up. It's building this social capital. For leaders in particular, it's calling out, when something didn't go right. or when there was some kind of, that sales director that I mentioned to you right at the start of this masterclass, they had to model vulnerability in apologizing to their regional sales manager because they got it wrong, monumentally wrong, because they didn't check their story before they went and, tried to pull the person up. They took the client's version before really trusting their team. So they had to model vulnerability in that. We've got to encourage open communication. And that's even when, there is a risk that there's going to be opposing views with a particular topic, because it might be very quick to shut the conversation down and pull the captain's call card and say, well, this is what we're doing. But if we do that, we're not encouraging this open communication. And it's also, from that intimacy perspective in our trust equation, making sure that we've got regular check-ins, that we're doing all those things to really connect in with the person, and making sure that people can speak up without, fear of judgment or fear of being criticized. Leaders that really look at psychological safety but to build trust, they also look at learning from failure and rewarding that. So I always say here, this is not about encouraging recklessness. It is far from recklessness, right? We don't want sloppy organizations that from a governance perspective, kind of anything goes. That's not psychological safety. That's poor management and poor leadership. But what we do want is for people to, if there is a mistake that's made, to really focus actually on the insights rather than the mistake. And that's great psychological safety. So where we go, okay, something happened, we can't really do anything with that, but what can we learn from it so we avoid it next time? Yeah. So that's that rewarding from failure. And then fostering inclusiveness. This I think is getting harder. On the weekend, I have an Italian background. My parents are Italian, and I don't know why, but Giorgia Meloni, who's the Italian Prime Minister, just started coming up in my social feeds. And you can only imagine then all the other stuff that started coming into my feeds because of her beliefs and her mindsets. I was reading it over the weekend going, oh my gosh, we're living in a time, I think, where fostering this inclusiveness is getting harder because some may be concerned about sharing their views, openly. But good psychological safety is about enabling everybody to come with their opinions, their views. It's that celebration of we're not always going to agree, and that's okay, but I respect you as a person. And I'm not going to criticize you for your views. I may not agree with your views, but it's not about you personally. Yeah. And I reckon that, does everyone agree that's getting harder to do? It's a bit tricky. So it's about just dealing, with it sensitively, because at the end of the day, we're still trying to foster that trust. But I reckon it's getting harder to do. All right. So what I'd like you to do, does anyone, before we go into this question, do you have any questions on this, on psychological safety and how it impacts trust? Feel free to pop it in the chat. All right. Well, I've revealed the question, so let's go to it, given that there's no other comments. All right. I have a question for you. So can you think about a time when you didn't speak up at work? So it was a time when you felt strongly about something, but you decided for whatever reason not to speak up. And I'd love for you, please, to reflect on what was it that stopped you. I'm going to give you a minute or so just to think about that one. Is anyone happy to share? you like to unmute? You don't need to describe the time, but maybe something that stopped you from speaking up.
I'm happy to share.
Thanks, Stephanie.
It had been a few small things that stopped me eventually speaking up about we were designing a new system tool thing. And it was everyone else in the meeting seemed to have a lot more confidence and surety in what they were saying. But something deep down inside me, I knew that I was right, like what I was recommending. I was thinking, this is right. I'm right in what I'm thinking, and I want to express that. But a couple of my decisions had been overridden by more senior staff, I suppose, leading up to this particular meeting. And then, as it turned out, they had to back down on those decisions, and I was right. So I probably should have spoken up, but everybody else seemed so much more confident, and a couple of my decisions were overridden by more senior staff in the build up to this. So yeah, I think that's what stopped me from speaking up, but it felt good when it all turned out that what I thought was correct, and I probably should have spoken up. Then we just had to deal with fallout from that, which we fixed anyway. But it was, yeah, so just lack of confidence, I suppose.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple of follow-up questions, Stephanie?
Sure.
Sorry, my dog's very loud.
All right.
Arlo, that's very loud. You can't participate in the masterclass. Stephanie, you spoke about confidence. Was there anything in particular that had eroded that for you over time? So you did say that a couple of decisions had been overridden. Was it just that, or was it anybody else, or anything else?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a couple of my decisions were overridden, and then I think it's the way everyone was speaking, and it was kind of like, am I being spoken over the top of? Are they actually listening to me? Am I explaining, communicating clearly, or is that just being pushed to the side because everyone sort of was quite strong in their opinions? So I'm not too sure, but definitely having a couple of my decisions overridden started that questioning of, oh, do I really do understand this, and am I heading down the right path with this? So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And I think sometimes that when our confidence is knocked for whatever reason, because, we can see a pattern of behavior perhaps where we feel like our input is not being valued or heard, we can start to take that back seat, right? And you can see it if we think about the Patrick Lencioni triangle. If there's not enough trust to start off with there, we'll just take a little bit of a back seat. We're not necessarily going to freely give what we're feeling or contribute maybe to that discussion to the extent that we could. And yet it does, then it feels great, right? But it's the old adage of the I told you so, right? And then there's not much that can be done. But yeah, thank you for sharing, Stephanie, because I think it's a really, really good example. So often it can be this confidence, it can be why would I? Maybe it's I've been criticized in the past, no one listens. Who am I to, give that view? Maybe we don't perceive ourselves to be senior enough or to have the knowledge. There's been a couple of stories, and they're both stories I've heard on different podcasts over the years, but where when we don't speak up, it can have serious consequences. So one was a trek that was happening up Everest, and it was beyond base camp. A group had set off to continue their trek, and one of the people in the group that was one of the guide tours realized that the oxygen levels were lower than what they needed to be to get them to the next level. And they told the leader that, and the leader was like, no, we're fine. We'll keep going. We've done it, before. They ended up losing most people. The oxygen levels weren't where they needed to be. And so they ended up losing most people on that trek. So dire consequences, right? And it's those kinds of experiences, unfortunately, where if we did feel confident enough and really trust that we could contribute, maybe, and that person did, so they did contribute, but the leader decided to make the captain's call and not listen to the other people that were in their group. And that's often what stops it. And hopefully it's not, ending in those life and death situations. But it's often those circumstances where we're not listened to. So we go, well, what's the point? If I'm not listened to, I'm just going to back out. I'm not going to give an opinion on whatever it is, even though we might really feel it at our core that it's the right thing to do. Okay, so it's a question really to hopefully get you reflecting about what was happening from a psychological safety perspective. Was there a particular instance or ongoing practices that means that I just held back? Maybe it was a personality type of the people that I was working with. Maybe if that personality didn't gel with mine and we had very different working styles, almost opposite working styles, maybe that could be a contributing factor sometimes as to why we don't contribute to the extent that we should, and therefore eroding trust. All right. So I want to finish up with giving you a little bit of a formula, if you like, around restoring trust. So we cannot stop instances. We can try, but it's hard to stop instances where trust will be eroded. So at best, if it is eroded, which it was for the sales director that I started this masterclass, that story with, what we can do is we can acknowledge. So the minute we become aware, it's acknowledging what has happened. So the situation, the violation, expressing regret, remorse, and trying to make amends. And I say try because sometimes the person that we want to offer that apology to may not be ready to hear it from us. They might be quite affected, maybe angry, maybe frustrated, maybe very upset. But we can try, give that apology. Then, so we should say sorry up front, right? That's the first bit. Then we're explaining. It says in brackets there, not defensively, and I almost wish I'd bolded that. So we're trying to explain the context and maybe what led to the particular situation, but we're not trying to explain it away. Because if you do that, you invalidate, there's no point in apologizing. If then you go, yeah, sorry, but blah, 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 like who cares? They're going to stop listening at that point, and you've eroded trust even further. So you want to explain the context, not defensively. You want to give them some transparency around what you were thinking, what led you to that course of action. And then really that's about dialogue, right? So you maybe asking some questions, maybe explaining, maybe asking if they have any questions, if they need any more information, whatever it might be, but it's a conversation. Then finally, we've got to act and sustain. And that sustain bit is about making it sustainable for the ongoing benefit of the relationship. The act and sustain bit, there's very limited that you can do after you've apologized and after you've given the context. The third bit, might as well say the proof's in the pudding. That's it. The proof is then in the pudding. If we do not then from that point on show consistency, trustworthy behavior in every action with reliability, credibility, all of that, then we can't hope to build trust. So we've got this: acknowledge, explain, act and sustain. Okay. Some other habits just to model, which I think bring it home in terms of what we've been talking about today, but it's trust is not declared. It's like we can't say trust me. You run a mile from anyone that says trust me. And I don't like when people go, oh, honestly, like I just want to honestly say. I'm like, does that mean you don't honestly normally say things? So why do you need to announce that? I always find that very bizarre. But trust is not declared, it's demonstrated because we feel it. Remember, we can't pinpoint an exact time in a relationship when we knew we trusted somebody, but we can when they get it wrong. So habits to model: communicate, intent early and clearly. Keep small promises and large promises. But this really, Stephanie said it before, those micro breaks, they're important. Those micro actions are important. When we're uncertain, admit it. If we do something wrong, admit it. That goes back to the principles of psychological safety. And ask for and act on feedback all the time, right? So this is like a continual feedback loop between the two people or between you and your team. Ask for it all the time. These are things that help really to foster trust throughout. In our deliberate leadership framework, we focus on three things: energy, performance, and relationships. And in terms of energy, because trust is almost like a signal that we send, every interaction transmits energy. So you really want to be thinking about every single interaction, whether it's spoken, unspoken, that has an impact on people's level of trust in you, particularly when you're a leader because you're emitting that energy. In relationships, when we're building relationships, as it says there, trust is not declared, it's felt. And so we've got to make sure that, going back to our trust equation, intimacy, we're meeting often, we're meeting and the quality of the connection is good. And we're doing that all the time in our interactions. And then in performance, as it says there, it's the echo of trust. So teams that trust each other operate with less drag, like it just feels good. And if you scan up in the chat, and we had a look before at what it feels like when we don't have trust in teams, but it feels good, it's clearer, we know why we're there, and we're ready to perform together. So I wanted to just highlight that in terms of our deliberate leadership framework and how trust plays into that. Thank you for spending some time with me today. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, but if you scan that QR code, it will take you to a section on our website with just some goodies for you as a thank you for attending today, which we like to leave you with, so you've got something. But does anybody have any questions or any comments before we finish off?
Just a comment on my own manager who has done quite a lot of study under you, Rita. He demonstrated after that incident I spoke about. I had eventually spoken up in some feedback forums that we have, and he identified that it was myself that had said that, and he was able to deal with it. So he came out, acknowledged, and followed those 3 steps. So acknowledged, he has definitely absolutely followed through. And yeah, rebuilt that trust. So it was good to come out. Eventually I did speak up, and that was the key to that. Otherwise he wouldn't have been aware.
Yeah, good. And so it can be repaired. So that's a good example of it can be repaired, but as long as the person's got that right intention, about how they do it. Good to hear. All right. Well, we're just on 1 o'clock. I want to say thank you so much for spending an hour of your time today with me, particularly on a Monday. Have a great week, and we'll send the recording and the transcript to you all too. But thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Rena.
Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Jay, I'll catch you on. Oh, there we go. How are you? Stop the recording.